Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Squad Room. On today's show, I have author and military veteran and PTSD survivor and thriver Tom Voss on the show, the author of Where War Ends, a combat veteran's 2,700-mile journey to heal. Stay with us.
You are a warrior.
321 status.
What kind of vehicle is it?
You are the very best your nation has to offer.
911.
Multiple shots fired.
They're asking you to lead.
5. We need a Bearcat.
It's up to us.
So 133. I need somebody that's got a visual on where the shooter is.
You must be sound in mind, body, and spirit.
40 feet, where's the officer down? I have a rescue helicopter that wants to land and help.
This is the podcast that will make you the one.
Copy running eastbound.
The one that will bring everyone back.
Trouble, we have shots fired. Give me backup now.
Because no one else is coming.
We're going to have an officer shot, 100 block of East Street.
Suspect is down.
This is the Squad Room.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Squad Room. I'm your host, Garrett Tesla. I'm an active duty sergeant for a sheriff's officer in Southern California. And on the show, we tackle a wide variety of topics, including stuff like we talk about today, trauma and PTSD, to health and nutrition, to eating right, to the kind of weight training programs we go through, to our leadership and our leadership development, how to lead ourselves. Lots of good stuff in the weeks ahead. And if you haven't already, go back and listen to some of the old episodes, and you'll see just all the huge expanse of categories and topics that we cover. My guest today is this is I love it when this happens. My guest was a guy I'd never heard of, and just in a roundabout way, not even roundabout, I tripped across him in a bookstore. I was out with my daughter, and she was picking up a book, and I just ended up coming across his book, started thumbing through it, picked it up, went home, read it cover to cover, and thought, this dude's got to be on my show. And turns out he lives about 30 minutes from me. And small world. And really impacted by his book. His name is Tom Voss. The book is Where War Ends, a combat veteran's 2,700-mile journey to heal. Now, Tom is got a lot of things in his quiver, but what really started, what prompted the story, he'll talk about it, but the short version, just to entice you, to get you into it, is he joined the military at the age of 18, went and deployed to Mosul right at the beginning of the Iraq War, lost several friends in those early battles, came home traumatized from that, developed PTSD, years and years of addiction to both alcohol and drugs, struggled through all those things. His not taking no for an answer sister finally pulled him out of it after a long battle. I mean, we're talking about a decade. And then he did something crazy, which was walked across the country. Anyway, don't want to give up the whole interview. I think I just did. But just to entice you to listen to what he has to say. He has to say about trauma, apologizing to yourself for being okay with not being okay, how strength and asking for help is a strength and not a weakness. And the difference between moral injury and PTSD. We're hearing a lot more about moral injury. I think it's going to be something we hear more and more about as we learn more about it. I just see so much of it in law enforcement and in all the first responders that I think it's going to be hard to ignore in the years coming up. So we'll get to him in just a second. Real quick, want to talk to you and thank our sponsors of this episode, Hard to Kill Fitness. You know, this current pandemic that we're in has obviously changed the game and how we manage our health and our fitness. And with gyms across the world shutting their doors and that good fresh produce in short supply, we really, really have to take ownership of our routines when it comes to our fitness. A lot of you have been left scrambling to replace your gym routine with something you can do at home. Others of you might already have a home gym, but maybe you're looking for something more structured that you can set yourself up for with success. Well, this episode is sponsored by Hard to Kill Fitness, and I think they have a solution to a problem that is that I have of staring at the whiteboard and wondering what to do. Hard to Kill is run by a team of military veterans and active duty police officers who offer simple yet highly effective and proven functional training workouts that you can do at home or in the gym. The routines focus on basic equipment and fundamental movements, so you don't have to learn how to do Olympic lifts or complex movements. Hard to Kill Fitness develops workouts specifically for the demands of military and first responder communities. And their goal is to prepare you physically and mentally for all the challenges we all face in the streets. Each workout comes as a PDF, and it includes detailed descriptions of the movements in each workout, tips on the mindset, and a progressive path that builds on the previous work you've already put in. You also get access to their private Facebook group, and you can interact with the coaches there by email or by Instagram. Right now, Hard to Kill Fitness is offering 30% off their bodyweight programs, which require minimal equipment, just a willingness to get after it. Check them out at hardtokillfitness.co or on Instagram at hardtokill_fitness. Okay, guys, one last thing before we get to the interview. I want to remind you that we now have our shop open. Our store is open on our website. It's actually bigger than just our website. It's a whole thing. I actually created a whole different apparel line to show respect for all the first responder communities and all the people who are trying to get after it and serve their community and be the one outside of just the police. So though the podcast is kind of directed towards police and law enforcement specifically, I had a lot of ideas around my head to celebrate all of the professions. So if you want to support the show and you want to rock some cool gear, please check out aworthycauselife.com. The name of the clothing brand is A Worthy Cause, and a lot of you will recognize that as a fantastic part of the quote from Teddy Roosevelt's speech about the man in the arena. That those three words have always hung in my head as just super powerful imagery for what we do on a daily basis. And over at aworthycauselife.com, we have T-shirts, we have hoodies, we got coffee mugs, we've got iPhone cases, all sorts of stuff. A lot of the stuff you'll see that you'll recognize as mantras and slogans from the show. There's a whole ton of new stuff, though. There's graphic images and stuff like that you have never seen before. It's super cool stuff. I'm really proud of the work we put in to get this up and running. And you can check it out at aworthycauselife.com. All right, now here we are with Tom Voss. Tom Voss, welcome to the Squad Room, man. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I read your book. This was fun for me. Well, the book wasn't necessarily fun. I enjoyed it. But the story about how I came into your book, I wanted to start with that because
Sure.
I was in the bookstore with my daughter. My daughter's an avid reader, and I was in a bookstore here in town and just caught your book, which is named Where War Ends, a combat veteran's 2,700-mile journey to heal. And the subtitle to that is even Recovering from PTSD and Moral Injury Through Meditation. And those are three buzzwords that have been on my mind a lot recently: PTSD, moral injury, and meditation. And we've had a good amount of guests come on who've talked about all three of those things and in different aspects or in different ways. But here was a book that kind of touched on all of these issues. And I had just finished rereading Josh Monce's book, The Beauty of a Darker Soul. I don't know if you know Josh. Fascinating guy. He was also in the Army. He was an Army major, was shot and killed in Afghanistan, I believe. Was on the table, no pulse for 15 minutes. He was done. He remembers dying. He came back. And then this book is about his experience recovering from that experience.
Right.
I'm rambling as I talk about how I found your book. I realize that. But so anyway, this piqued my interest. I picked it up. I started flipping through it. Actually ended up with a signed copy. That was cool. And one of the few books of the last couple of years where I read cover to cover without stopping. And compelled by your honesty in it, the story that drove you to do the things that you eventually did, but also the very real struggle. And so for people who haven't heard of the book, haven't heard of you, talk about this experience. Obviously Where War Ends, talk about you're a veteran. We don't need to jump through all the things that we can establish that, but you grew up in the Midwest, as did I, and joined the military. And so I wanted to kind of start there with that decision to join, why you did that, and what you thought that experience was going to be, and then we'll kind of contrast that later on with what it actually was.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you were saying, I'm from a suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and ended up joining the United States Army in 2003, and joined as an infantry soldier. So, and because of the influence of my grandfather was a World War II veteran, ended up fighting on Iwo Jima. But then more importantly for me, I realized at a young age that my family was kind of a family of service. So my father is a retired social worker, my mother is a retired teacher, and my grandfather, after serving in the military, went on to become a judge and actually ended up volunteering for maybe 5 or 6 different veteran service organizations because of his experience during war. So I really kind of looked up to him and people of that generation that had served, and I felt the call to not only serve my country, but kind of follow in the footsteps of service from my family. So joining with the mindset that that's what I was doing. I was being of service to my country, and really kind of proud to serve, and I'm still proud about my service today. And I really kind of break it down into a few distinct parts, which is I see my time spent in Iraq. So I deployed to Mosul, Iraq from 2004 to 2005, and that's kind of a separate event outside of my service. So that's where I ended up. 2004 is when I kind of got a reality check in, what war is and what combat is and all the different aspects of it, and how actually complicated the job is. In today's wars, unfortunately, they're extremely complicated and politicized, and all sorts of different things to complicate things even further on the ground.
There's a interesting point I want to touch on, and maybe it's something that I don't want to jump ahead to, but when you say you're proud of your service, I'm glad to hear that, because obviously this is an audience that understands that idea, right? Understands service and serving a purpose greater than yourself. Oftentimes also in a political environment, or maybe necessarily with objectives or tactics that we may not be quite wholeheartedly in agreement with, politically, but nonetheless serving something beyond yourself and serving and protecting your community. And then, not to give away the ending here, but we're talking about PTSD and the development of that, and then the recovery from that. I would think, or I'm glad to hear, like I said, I would think though that struggle and that progression through that healing would cause a lot of people to not be proud of their service, especially with moral injury. So I'm glad to hear that you say that you're proud of your service there. Moral injury is kind of a new term too, and maybe we should address that kind of quickly. Yeah. And if you are willing to define that as best you can for my audience here.
Sure. My understanding of it is, so when you witness or participate in or fail to prevent acts that transgress your deeply held sense of right and wrong. And this happens a lot in war. It's kind of inherent in war, right? So sometimes you get orders that you're supposed to fulfill, and you don't really know the full picture. And then, down the road, you find out the full picture, and then you start asking yourself questions. Was I justified in my actions? Can I be forgiven? Am I a good person? So these are the moral questions and moral dilemmas that came up for me after fighting in Iraq. So I think it's really important also to understand that it kind of humanizes trauma, and we hear all these clinical terms like post-traumatic stress and everything that's kind of trying to define us and put us kind of in this box of clinical terms. It's like you can check the boxes of the symptoms that you have, and then you magically have post-traumatic stress. If you meet 5 out of the 10 markers or whatever it is, there you have it. Mm-hmm. So moral injury, I think, is really important in the sense that understanding that everyone has a different level of resiliency built into them, and understanding that we're all humans and that we all react differently to different stressors and different traumas. Some people come into the military with extreme trauma already, and then their experience in war just compounds that. So understanding that, deep down, I think everyone has a moral compass, and it's challenging when it's violated.
And my understanding too is you mentioned it applies to things that you experience, right? Either an action you've done that maybe violates your moral code. Yeah. But is it also an element of just seeing those things happen to other people when you had nothing to, you had no hand in it, but you've seen it?
Yeah, definitely. That falls into the category of failing to prevent, acts, and, we would see that with the civilian population all the time, just wrong place, wrong time, nothing we can do about it. Sometimes we weren't even able to stop and render aid. So, that, in itself, just from a human perspective, we under this idea of deploying that we're there to protect and serve, and that we're there to help as many people as we can, and, bring some stability to the country, and all these different things that we were told. And then, you're getting orders from your command that, guess what? That's not happening today. Mm-hmm. Like, we have to do something else. And then, you clearly see, wounded people or people that are suffering, and there's nothing that you can do about it. So at the time, you don't really have the time to process it. I'm sure it's similar in the police force and first responders as well, to where, in that moment, you have to do what you have to do, and do what you're asked to do, and, carry out your orders and do these different things. But down the road, that comes back, what kind of person am I that I, acted that way? And, I was given orders to do one thing, and, deep down, I felt like we should be doing something else.
Mm-hmm. I see that. I think that as this term is researched and studied, and we talk about it more and more, we're going to find that moral injury really is prevalent in our service, and not so much in maybe the things we did, but in the things maybe we didn't do, like you talk about, like we didn't intervene. It's so easy to get cynical. It's so easy to get jaded and just build that wall that's, to protect ourselves. But we end up dismissing victims that need help, that we are in we're in a position to help, or just the day in and day out carnage, for lack of a better term, of child abuse and domestic violence and the destructive effects of all those things on families, and just seeing this over and over and over again. And for me, it's easy to see this happening with myself, because you begin to wonder, are there any good people left? And of course there are, right? I mean, it's obvious that we're surrounded by wonderful, beautiful people. My family, for example, but it's easy to go down a rabbit hole of just thinking that everything is ruined because we're around this so much.
Yes. And on top of it, like, just to, kind of expand on my experience based on what you were saying, is losing faith in humanity, right? Mm-hmm. When you see the worst of it day in and day out, and especially in a war zone where you're on 24/7 for 12 months straight. So you really come back, not trusting people, and really, seeing the, having your whole worldview kind of change. And I'm sure this extends into first responders and police as well, to where it's like, you have to see the worst of it day in and day out, and you have to come up with the, proper tools and to manage that stress.
Mm. Yeah, which will obviously why we're talking here. You mentioned some people have trauma before they go into the military, and for the service. And I've always liked the analogy of a bucket, right? And your bucket's full, and it can only hold so much, and you have to do things at some point. It's either going to spill over by itself, or you're going to manage it and manage your bucket. And everyone's born with a different sized bucket,
right?
So it's not your fault that your bucket is smaller than someone who's got a large bucket, etc. But when we, I think an element for me is when we enter the first responder community, or policing specifically, this applies to fire too, because they're in this thick of it with us, and the paramedics, of course. When we enter, we bring those things with us, and then we go through training that teaches us how to shut that switch off, right? Or so we think. And so we shut that switch off, but we're never taught how to turn it back on. And I imagine that was the same for you. Your training, you shut that stuff down, and then even though there's a reintegration process when you come back from war, my understanding from all the veterans I've talked to, my partners, there's not an intense way that they work with you to really turn that back on.
Right. Yeah. We'll use air quotes for the reintegration.
You're right. Yeah. You're basically like just quarantined for a while, really.
Yeah.
So I guess my question then on that idea of the bucket full, knowing now what you've been through, and we'll get through the whole process of that, but knowing that now, how full was your bucket when you joined? You know, what did you bring with you into that environment that then maybe exacerbated some of the issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my childhood and upbringing, I had a pretty tame life up until that point. You know, being Midwest, you know, my family was pretty conflict averse and never really got into too much trouble or anything like that. You know, my dad being a juvenile social worker, he kind of kept an eye on who I was hanging out with and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I really didn't have too much, you know, coming in besides maybe some like concussions and stuff from playing football. But, you know, other than that, it was the majority of my, I think, traumatic experience happened in combat and, you know, and through military training itself. It's an intense process of kind of deprogramming you to be, you know, putting the mission first. And, you know, it's kind of opposite of our society where, you know, we're very individualistic here where, you know, we need to get ours and provide for ourselves and, you know, our families. And then in the military, you're making that switch where you're sacrificing yourself for, you know, the people you work with. And you know, other than first responders, there's not too many other professions that, you know, you have people that are willing to, you know, lay down their lives for the people that they work with. You know, I'm sure there are, you know, a handful of professions that, you know, are tight like that, but military really trains you, you know, in that regard. And then, you know, right from the beginning, you're thrown in a mix of people that are from all over the country, from all different backgrounds of life, socioeconomic upbringings, all these different things. So it's a really unique situation, I think, in that if you're, you know, going through basic training, you really get to experience what America, you know, is made up of. So you have a very diverse group of people that, like you're saying, you know, coming in with all sorts of different things. You know, whether it's, you know, participating in gangs or, you know, you just get the whole range of folks joining the military. Yeah,
you know, in reading the book, I connected so much with that upbringing, that Midwest upbringing. You know, I mean, and I again saw myself in a lot of the writing in terms of, you know, very like conflict adverse family myself. Parents are still together. You know, very like Methodist and just kind of like, I don't know, it sounds corny to just kind of write it off as Midwest, but that's almost its own adjective for that kind of upbringing, I think. And then for me, when I left and eventually ended up in California and then into the academy, a similar experience, not gang members, of course, but guys, a lot of guys who had just come out of combat and a lot of guys who were from all over the country who just ended up in the LA area because they were stationed there or that's where they met their wife and the wife was from there. So they had moved there. So I ended up in an academy with people from all over the country, different experiences, different education levels. And for me, that was a good experience, but it was one of the first times, even though I was 27 by that point, that my eyes wide open and realized, oh, I don't know anything. You know, I haven't seen the world. I haven't interacted with these kinds of people before.
Right.
Yeah.
And just to kind of go on your bucket analogy, you know, that's something I use as well. But, you know, instead of liquid, I use like traumatic experiences as rocks, right? So it's like you have a bucket that, you know, you can take on so much, right? Like you're saying, the size of the bucket, right? But at some point it's going to get too heavy and you're going to have to go and dig through those different rocks and pick them up and look at them and see, you know, why am I carrying this heavy rock around? You know, what is this, you know, linked to, or how did it get here? And experience in really looking at the experiences of the past.
The book starts. I like the title of the first part, Stuck. And it starts with a story of an effort from. Was it your sister, I think, right? Who was
Rebecca,
trying to wake you. And I want to. I don't know how to be. I guess I'll just ask it bluntly. But when you came home from war, you did your tour, and you came home. Things weren't right.
Right.
You know? And so, what was the first inclination to you that you knew something was wrong, or did it have to, or did you think everything was fine and you were just managing it? And what was that process like when you got home?
Yeah. So I didn't really, I was on kind of autopilot, and I think when you go through the training that you go through in the military, you just kind of fall back on that. So, I was doing everything that I was supposed to be doing, going to school full time. I had a job and I would maintain all that. Right. But, on the flip side, I was drinking, 18 beers at night to go to sleep. So, but in the morning I would get up and, fulfill all my responsibilities. And, that's just kind of the training that we had in the military. So I was already kind of tuned into that. And I didn't really think that there was too much wrong, besides the fact that, I was the only one in my community, I thought, that, had this experience. So it was a very isolating experience for me, because there's no active duty military base in Wisconsin. So there's not too many people I could connect with about the experience. So I kind of went on like that for about 2 years before my sister noticed that I wasn't the same person and that I was drinking more. And that's something that's really hard to do when you're, from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where everyone,
beer state.
Everyone's throwing them back always. So, but she understood that, just that there was something wrong. And then she asked if I would be willing to go talk to someone, and immediately I put up barriers to, I'm like, the only way I'm going to talk to someone if it's a combat veteran, and they have to be, had served in Iraq. So I was putting up all these, barriers and resistance to the idea in the first place. But, fortunately enough for me, that my sister did find someone. And
she's really the catalyst to get you on that path that eventually brought you towards recovery. Where were you headed if she hadn't stepped in?
Yeah, I mean, I was getting to the point of suicidal ideation. So, I was thinking of different ways to kill myself. And, today as it stands, we've lost 3 guys from our platoon to suicide or military or, war complications, health issues, things like that. So it was something that was in my mind a lot, that like I understood it. I'm like, I get it. I get why someone would want to take their own life who has served before. Like, I understand that you don't want to have to think about horrible things 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's kind of the space that I was in, and really kind of on a downward spiral in the fact that, I was destroying relationships, and, it was kind of my default. And then I would like pick up and move and, try to start over somewhere else, and the same thing would happen. And this is all stemming from not being able to deal or manage with the traumatic experiences that I had from my deployment. And just to go, even just to be open about it, my platoon sergeant was killed in action. One of my squad leaders was killed in action. Our platoon sergeant, the replacement, the very first day we got our replacement platoon sergeant, we went on a mission with him, and we got hit with a car bomb, and he got shrapnel into his temple, and we lost. He ended up losing his eye and having to go to Germany and get medevaced out immediately. And, so we went through a lot of different leadership changes within a short amount of time. And that was really challenging to do, because we were a scout sniper platoon. So we were really a small group of guys, and we were really close. And we, trained together for about a year and a half before even deploying. So, you start losing friends, and, seeing all that destruction has a pretty deep impact on you, even though you don't, feel it at the time.
Yeah. I'm curious about the suicidal ideations, because you hear people talk about it a lot, but, in kind of clinically, like you say, like, the psychologist talking about it, but it's rare to get someone who's actually experienced that to be willing to talk about it openly. And I'm curious from your experience, when those began to occur, was it at first a scary thought and you were scared of yourself that you could have that thought, or was it a comforting thought that you had an out?
Yeah, I mean, it was for me, it was more comforting, and it was just kind of like, okay, well, you know, it was at that point in my life, it was finding the most harmless way, I guess you could say, of doing it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like, all right, going over things like, am I gonna, wrap my car around a tree, or no, because then my family, how would that impact my family? So going over that kind of stuff in my head it was pretty natural, and I don't know that it was like, um, you know, people. I really believe that people don't really want to take their life; they want to end the suffering, right? They want to stop the suffering, and this feels like the only way to do that. Um, but unfortunately, the reality of it is it just amplifies the suffering around you, right? So the family, friends, and everyone else, right? Then that trauma gets passed down onto them. So really, finding healthy ways to cope and manage and move through the trauma instead of trying to stop it in its tracks is the way that I found to be most successful.
And it wasn't like your sister got you to one therapist who'd been a Iraqi combat veteran and all things were good. I mean,
Right. No,
you,
yeah.
you struggled against it for quite a while, years,
Yeah.
right? And then,
Yeah.
and so I guess I really want to emphasize that point too, for
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
that it wasn't just like, okay, you got that first therapy session in and it was all, all good from there, because it wasn't. You
Right.
resisted it, and you tried a couple different things at her insistence. Would back out. You'd retreat from those things, but
Right.
she would eventually bring you back to some modality. How long was it where from that? Okay, she got you to that first appointment to where you felt you were the one taking control of your healing.
Yeah. So really, 2008 was the first time I went and saw a clinical social worker, and it was at a vet center. So it was really kind of a non-clinical environment. So you can meet with a clinical social worker one-on-one, and they also offered some group sessions for post-traumatic stress, which was at that time it was mainly Vietnam era veterans. So I got a lot of chance to hang out with a lot of those guys as well and kind of learn from them. But as soon as I started doing that, I got put into the VA medical system to where I, immediately saw a psychiatrist, and it got put on, 5 different medications to stabilize. And at that time, they're just kind of throwing medications at post-traumatic stress because of the number of veterans that were coming in with signs and symptoms of it was so overwhelming for the system that, it was my belief that they just had this idea of like, well, okay, we just need to stabilize, as best we can and try to wade through it. So I was on a bunch of different medications, and at that time I was still abusing alcohol. So I was now abusing prescription meds and alcohol and other drugs on top of that, just to kind of numb myself out. And that went on. Maybe a year later, I took myself off the medications because it made me feel a little less human than when I was not on. It was like at least I could feel the sorrow and depression and sadness. So I ended up taking myself off that, and that went on for about 10 years. So there was a long period of just failing, I guess you could call it, and really not really seeking help for myself. And, you brought that point up about my sister, taking me in to see someone. And I don't know if you've ever tried to take anyone into therapy sessions. It's a struggle, right? So coming in from this, what I've learned over that period of time is you have to have, or you have to want it for yourself. And, I at that time in my life, I didn't want it for myself. I was doing it to appease my family members. My family members wanted me to be better. They loved me. They wanted me to be okay. And I'm like, okay, I recognize that. And I'm doing that for my family. But deep down, if you don't want to heal yourself, right? It's not going to happen. So whatever modality you do, whether it's talk therapy or, equine therapy or, whatever you can come up with that you might think you might enjoy. If you're not doing it from the place of, I want to be better, I want to be healed, I want to not feel this way anymore, then it's a really, it's an uphill battle the whole way if you're not doing it for yourself.
And so, the second part of your book is really about that moment where you decide to do something for yourself. And that decision for you is to do a cross-country hike with a fellow veteran from Milwaukee to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could think of a small handful of things I might do for my own, recovery to get better, but a hike across the country wasn't top of that list. What was it for you about wanting to do a hike like that, a walk across the country, that you felt that was compelling to you?
Yeah, I mean, the idea came to me, because I had been struggling for like 10 years, and I tried a lot of different things, a lot of different therapies, a lot of different things. And I knew that there needed to be some heavy lifting on my part before I was even prepared to go into a situation like that. So I felt that walking forced me to be with myself, right? So these days we have so many different ways of distracting ourselves from what's going on inside. And, this is a perfect example of everything that we're facing today, right? It's like we have to be with ourselves. We have to be with our families, right? There's no going, anywhere now. So it's like, that's what I was trying to create, this environment for myself of where I just had to be with myself. And walking was one way to do that. And you look at all the distractions we have in life, whether it's going to school, working full-time, family, all these different things, there's not a lot of time to sit back and reflect and process. And I didn't, while I was deployed, I was 20, turned 21 when I deployed. And almost 10 years later, I had never really sat back and looked at how these events, the deaths of my friends, how that impacted me. And I never grieved. We never got a chance to grieve. We hadn't, anything like that while we were deployed. So you have a whole year's worth of trauma essentially packed into a real small time frame that I hadn't even looked at or touched or really processed or decompressed from. So the ability to walk, and the trek ended up taking us 5 months. So I had 5 months to really sit with myself, and there was only one thing to do every day, which was to get up and walk. And when you're doing that, and you have the physical exercise of walking, the being immersed in nature, I think these are recipes for success when dealing with traumatic events.
I think there's a simple metaphor in that. When you're dealing with anything, especially when you're dealing with something like that in yourself, the first rule is to move.
Yeah,
in some way. And if you can move outside and connect in some way with your surroundings and with nature, that's even better.
Totally. Yeah.
So you cover a lot of it in the book of this journey you take. A documentary crew follows you along. The documentary is called Almost Sunrise, and part of your trip goal is to also generate awareness for these issues for veterans, right?
Yeah.
And so you get some media coverage, you do media interviews, you end your walk on the famous Santa Monica Pier. And I thought it was interesting in the book that when you got to the pier, it was not what you expected internally,
Right.
Talk about that. You just accomplished this huge walk. It was 5 months in the making, all the logistics, all that time with yourself, and what happened?
Yeah, getting to the end, realizing, I think the realization was that I had a whole hell of a lot of work to do. I'm like, this is just the tip of the iceberg, even if it is the tip of the iceberg, So understanding that, I knew that this was going to be a long recovery process. And I think it taught me, I think in the end, now it kind of fast forwarding to today, to be patient with yourself when in the healing process. This takes time, this takes work. And, sometimes you have to take breaks, but then you have to go back at it and really dig down deep and start doing the work that you need to do to start feeling better. And I knew that, just getting to the end, I'm like, man, I have a long way to go before, and when I left walking across the country, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know what to do it. But going back to what you said, I knew that I needed to just do something, right? And that's that moving aspect.
Was it when you got there and you realized you had so much more to do? Was it encouraging because you at least now had a path and you knew something, you knew what had to be done, and you had a path, or was it this insurmountable mountain in front of you that you weren't sure you could handle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a little bit of both. It was like, okay, like I know the scope of what I need to work on, but I don't know really how it's going to happen or how it's going to unfold, and just having faith that, I had the good intentions, that I wanted to be better and that I wanted to heal, and just having faith in that, the fact that when you have that intention, I think nature really comes to support you when you really need it, and just being open and honest with yourself, and being able to, and this is something we get into the book, being able to forgive, I think was something that was really essential and core in my own healing. Not only the people that I was fighting against in Iraq, but forgiving myself for the things that I ended up participating in and doing while I was over there.
I think that is such a key element of this, that we put up a shell over, and we don't think that we need to apologize for anything, or the zero F's given kind of mentality. And it's like, no, one of the most powerful things you can do is sit with yourself and acknowledge that you have this conflict within you, and that it's okay that you do, and it's natural that you do, and that you did the best you could at the time with the information you had, versus what you know now. You can't compare yourself in those two different time frames.
Yeah.
When you left, okay, so you finished the walk in Santa Monica, you have this realization that you have so much more ahead of you. One of the things that you experienced, I think it was for the first time on the trip, was meditation.
Yeah.
And you got exposed to it through a teacher in Colorado, I think is the first experience with it, right?
Yeah.
And you end up, your first time, you didn't really quite stick, and it wasn't like your thing, but you was kind of curious, it seems. Like you were kind of curious about it. But within a year or so, you were actually working with one of those instructors,
right?
Working with other vets, teaching meditation. So as someone who has espoused the benefits of it, talking about me, but who struggles to maintain any semblance of a practice at it, what was the moment where it clicked for you that it became an integral part of your daily practice?
Yeah, I think when I first started, I could see how it could be beneficial. Like I got it. Like I understood that it could be beneficial to take 20 minutes a day to meditate. But I would slowly start to incorporate it into my life, and then it would drop off for a month or two, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to try. And then coming to realize that it's a discipline in your life, and it needs to be treated as such. And from my experience, what I've learned is we always see discipline as like a negative thing. We have to be disciplined about what we eat. We have to be, and we essentially shame ourselves into, different disciplines. But for me, it came to with a new understanding of the aspect of suffering. So, to go down the meditation road here, that's the whole idea, is we want to end suffering within ourselves. So when you can, take the time to be with yourself, and you understand that you need to incorporate this discipline, and what that actually does is it takes options off the table. And in the meditation world, they say all these options end up causing suffering for us in the end, right? If you always want the new car, the new phone model, or whatever it is, it's just nonstop stuff, right? And that's what ends up, that craving for that stuff ends up causing suffering within us. So when you add a discipline into your life, what you're actually doing is you're taking those options off the table, saying, I'm not going to go down this way. I'm not going to go down this way. I'm just going to stay going straight down this road because that's why I'm disciplined. And that's how I ended up having to treat meditation. And so it's okay, if I'm going to do this, I have to do it every day, and it's going to be incorporated into my life. It's not like, a diet where we do it for a few months and just see how it goes. And that's a good way to start. But you have to understand that, it's something you want as a tool in your tool chest. You have to practice. You have to practice at these things.
I think to that last word, practice. For me, I have to remind myself of that. I remind people who I try to encourage to do it is it's not a performance. It's also not perfection.
Right.
I've only had a small handful of meditation sessions where I could say, like, I was still the whole time or close to the whole time, right? It's almost always a battle against yourself to maintain the stillness if you even get there. Right. And some days are great and some days are not. So it's like throwing a baseball or swinging a bat. You got to practice at it and give yourself the grace that part of the process is that your monkey mind is going to fight you.
Yes. And understanding that, regardless of how you feel it goes, you're still getting benefits. And that's, one thing I wish someone would have told me right away. It's like, you're still getting health benefits from sitting there in contemplation, meditation. Your body is able to, there's tons of studies on this. Your body's able to heal itself. And I look at it as getting your mind out of the way so your body can do what it needs to do. That's why they recommend if you're sick or something like that to meditate, more often. So it gives your body a chance to get the rest that it needs, and you can achieve pretty deep rest with about 20 minutes of meditation. Mm-hmm.
I found for me, if I'm maintaining my practice too, that my ability to respond versus react is exponential. Yes. And in our environment of police work, man, what a crucial skill it is to have to be able to respond to something instead of react. And reacting to a threat or reacting to an angry citizen or reacting to our supervisor, the ability to respond, which, I mean, I'll let you speak to that because I'm sure people are like, what's the difference? But can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. For me, I look at it really like building your capacity to take things on, and that comes a lot to patience and being empathetic, and especially in the military, first responders, that takes a lot of patience, right? Mm-hmm. Like give you an example, on a mission, you have to work through an interpreter who's trying to interpret what you're trying to get across. You have to be patient with what's happening. I'm sure it happens in the first responder line of work all the time. So if you can build that capacity to where it's like, okay, I can make it throughout the whole day without, losing it or, going off on someone or being short with someone. Those little incremental changes actually make the world of difference. And that's what meditation can provide. And those are some of the benefits I don't think a lot of people talk about is just increasing your capacity overall to be able to take on daily stressors.
I think also a lesson I've only learned in the last couple of months, and I'm still developing that skill, still flexing that muscle to do it, is understanding, having that ability to check in with yourself. And I want to talk to you about what it means to check in as a separate question, but check in and kind of acknowledge where you're at, and then, like you say, forgive yourself, or to just acknowledge, like this is a good time right now with all the COVID stuff. Feeling, like, why am I anxious? Why am I so stressed out? Why am I snapping at my kids? Oh, you know what? I'm a little anxious today. I'm a little concerned, right? I've watched a little too much news. It's gotten into my head, and I'm worried. I'm worried about my family, or I'm worried about my job, or I'm worried about my partners. And being okay with acknowledging to yourself, it's okay to be scared or nervous or any of those things. And we are our own worst critics. So when we are able to do that for ourselves, then when we go out into the world, we are so much more compassionate and empathetic with other people because we see our own suffering in them.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
That's been a huge lesson for me over just like the last 6 months, maybe, and seeing it apply to the outside of me.
Yeah, definitely. And, building these different qualities, I guess you could say, in you, again, like we were saying, really makes the world a difference. If you're able to, and what you're talking about there is bringing your awareness to your feelings, or being able to name, your emotions and where they're coming from. I say is the best place to start with all of this. Okay, why do I feel this way? What is this linked to, right? Because things for post-traumatic stress, these are symptoms, right? And we treat the symptoms in our society. We end up treating the symptoms individually, but we have to find what the root cause is, and really looking at, okay, I'm being short with my family. I I feel anxiety in my chest. Where is this coming from? Like you were saying, right? Really going down that road and trying to identify, those things gets you into the space of self exploration, which is really, really important when you're really trying to heal yourself.
I mentioned it a second ago, and I think one of the first steps is checking in with yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of it's a woo-woo phrase, for lack of a better term, and I know a lot of people are going to put up a wall the minute they hear, hey, you need to check in with yourself. But oftentimes, too, the question is like, well, how do you do that? I mean, logistically, what's the process? Do you talk to yourself? So how has your check-in evolved? But where would somebody start with that?
Yeah, and it's just bringing the awareness to those experiences. So as soon as you can bring your awareness to how you're feeling, that shifts. It'll shift for you, and that's the beauty of this internal kind of reflection thing. If you're angry and upset, and then you're just kind of angry, upset all day, and you just kind of roll with it, and you let that emotion kind of highlight everything else, right? You can actually stop and ask yourself internally, where is this coming from, right? Because most of the time it doesn't have anything to do with the people in front of us, right? That's who get, they have the targets on them just because they're in proximity. That's how this projection ends up working. So really being able to identify, having a name for what you're feeling, is the first step. And that's why I think the concept of moral injury is so amazing, is because now we can have some verbiage around things like grief, guilt, shame. And the other thing I wanted to kind of touch on too is, like, a lot of my conditioning was from being in the military, where the point of view is, if you're a weak link, you're going to be replaced, right? So there's consequences for asking for help. There's consequences for going up to your team leader and said, hey, this is impacting me negatively. I think I need to speak with someone, right? And I saw it firsthand while we were deployed. We had a guy, one of our leadership person in a leadership role, ended up asking for help and being replaced. So it was a clear message for all of us that, okay, we better not be, we better just stuff this down.
Yeah.
So really kind of working with that too, and I'm sure it's in the culture of police, fire, and EMS as well, is finding that there's actually strength in asking for help, right? And that's how we build stronger people, knowing that there's people around them that are going to support them, and having confidence that we're going to work through this together, so that at the end you can become a stronger person and be able to move through these traumatic events, instead of just stuffing them down and then having a blowout, a year or two down the road that's incredibly detrimental to career, friendships, and all these different things.
I think of it, I 100% agree. And I think we're still navigating this in the first responder community, and there's absolutely negative consequences in some parts of the country for asking for help still. It's getting better, and some agencies are really leading the way, but it's still not there. But I like this idea that asking for help is a strength, and to equate it to something else. As a supervisor, as a sergeant, and if I'm running a squad of people and I have a guy who goes out and does a car stop, pulls the guy out of the car, searches the car by himself, hooks the guy up by himself, and doesn't ask for help, I would chew his butt out for not having support there, right?
Right.
It's dangerous to do that without support, without help, right? If I had a case where someone stops a car and they get a carload of stolen goods, and the rest of my squad didn't help that officer book all the evidence. They didn't help him. I would be upset that they didn't get the help that they deserved and needed, because that doesn't benefit any of us. But then on this one issue of mental health, when people should be asking for support, then we make it look like a bad thing.
Right.
Like our both of our communities are so involved in teamwork and serving outside of ourselves, like you touched on right at the beginning. You're ingrained to worry about the guy to your left and right more than you. But then when you actually have to worry about them and be willing to accept their request for help, that's when we go, whoa, time out. And we got to change that.
Yeah, definitely. It's shifting the perspective of seeing it as a weakness and really understanding, again, going back to like we all have different capacities of resiliency, right? So understanding that in the leadership role, understanding that the men and women that you're in charge of all have different resiliency levels and have different needs that need to be met when it comes to experiencing trauma and with mental health. So understanding that, okay, I'm going to put some energy and effort into making sure that my person gets help, and this is going to build them up to be a stronger person, because at the end of the day, if they can overcome this, right, it's going to reinforce that in them that they can do it and that they're going to be stronger and better people, and that just enhances and strengthens the team as a whole.
And then they're going to do what you're doing, which is turning around and reaching out for the next person after them, right?
Exactly.
And so I could talk a long time about this, but I know I only have you for a limited amount of time. What fascinates me is and I made a post on social media today kind of alluding to this, like the end of your book is like a Hollywood plot twist.
Yeah, welcome to my life.
and so you go from like curious about meditation but skeptical, to then teaching some classes, to then like just going all in. And so tell us a little bit about what that process was. I mean, to the point where you traveled to India and studied in India, and you had this big moment. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, I was getting to the point of where I understood that this was meditation, specifically was something that was really beneficial in my life. And I could start to notice, and what people will start to notice when they start meditation is that they don't feel the same, or they feel the same inside, but other people start to notice around them that they're a little more patient, that they're a little more helpful, that they're doing all these little tiny things that are kind of outside of the who they were before they started. So I understood that this was something that was beneficial for me, for my health, for my mental health, physical health too, and but at the same time, it was something that was really foreign to me and made me very uncomfortable, right? Because I don't know any. At that time, I didn't know anyone who like meditated regularly, and there's all these different organizations from all over the world that I didn't know how to navigate any of that, and I knew that it was making me feel uncomfortable, mostly because I think of my upbringing, my experience fighting in the Middle East, and having to overcome the uncomfortableness of that, and moving into a space of, look, I'm just going to show up and I'm going to give my 100%. And if it's something that doesn't end up working out, at least I'll have no regrets because I gave it my all, right? Even though it's uncomfortable for me, and I saw it as a kind of a growth point. I'm like, okay, like I'm going to have to move through this, and I'm doing it for my health and benefit, and just holding on to that and knowing why I'm doing it, and trying to explore something that kind of pulled me out of my own comfort zone was something that was really beneficial in the end.
And so, you traveled to India, and you lived there for a short period of time, right?
I did a couple long weeks there. So I did, I did like a 10-day stay, and then almost 3 weeks then, after that second time. And
so one of the things that kind of shocked me was, what's the longest single session meditation you've now achieved?
Oh, wow. Longest session I've done. I've done a few hour, actually come to think of it, I've done silent retreats before, where you're in silence for 4 to 5 days and you're just doing continuous meditation, and that's something that if people really want to be able to focus on themselves, try a silent meditation retreat. There's nowhere to go, absolutely nowhere to go. So those are the more intense practices that I've done before.
Okay. So one of the questions I get a lot, and we've covered in varying different approaches, but someone comes to you and asks they're interested in meditation, but they don't know where to start. Where do they start?
Yeah, I started with, there's a lot of good apps out there that have guided meditations, right? So I found that it was really challenging for me to even sit in silence and sit still for 5 minutes, So it was really challenging when I first started. But you start using these tools that are out there. So guided meditations are really great. You can find apps and you can find a ton of stuff online just to get started. And the most important part that you need to find a teacher or a group that really resonates with you. And this comes with anything, asking for help, going to therapy. You need to connect with your therapist to be able to make any kind of progress, right? So if there's no trust or anything, it's a challenging experience. So finding something that resonates with you. The other thing too is be as comfortable as possible. And this is something that, I had to learn, the hard way. Like if you need to sit in a chair, to start, sit in a chair to start, right? It's fine. It's fine. The main components of it is making sure that your back is straight. So you're sitting up with a straight spine, and that your head is free, right? So we tend to, if our head's leaning up against something, we tend to pass out. So really those are the two things. So your legs can be straight out. You can be sitting in a chair. You can be sitting on the floor on some cushions. But, my whole thing was really finding, start as comfortable as possible. So you're not, faced with many of the challenges of, sitting cross-legged upright, on a mat, right out of the gate. You're kind of setting yourself up for failure.
I cringe,
really,
yeah. Even now, I mean, 15 years of wearing a gun belt and like putting my knees in that position and sitting on a mat, like that's not going to happen. I do it in a chair. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it can be, the other thing is having a designated spot in your home. That's like, this is my spot, right? Because then what you start to do is you start creating a neural pathway. Like, this is my chair, this is my blanket that I use. And every time I know that I put this blanket on, right, or wrap myself in a blanket, I know it's time for meditation. Your body starts to recognize that, and then it becomes easier and easier and easier.
I like the idea of finding a community too of people around you, which is getting easier and easier as we go. You now teach meditation. You still do a lot of work with vets. Tell us real quick about what you're doing right now, and then how people can find out more about you.
Yeah, so I teach yoga and meditation. I travel around the country teaching free workshops for veterans, and giving lectures around that. I teach in yoga in Ojai, California, at a studio called Light and Space. They took a old car shop and refurbished it into a yoga studio. So I teach there during the week, and just do as much outreach and kind of awareness around veterans issues as I can. And if anyone feels inclined to reach out, I'm pretty active on Instagram at The Meditating Vet, and that is my website as well, is themeditatingvet.com.
And the book is Where War Ends, written by you and your sister together. And she also sounds like a fascinating person who
totally
has got a lot of fight in her. We'll put all the links that you just mentioned to your website, to your Instagram, to the book. We'll put those in the show notes. So if anyone's not got a pen in front of them right now, they can go to thesquadron.net to find out all the information on you. Tom, really appreciate your time. You mentioned Ojai, was just a side note, was excited to see that you're just literally down the street from me almost, just down the coast. And just hope that we can connect sometime in person and explore this a little bit more. But really enjoyed your book, really enjoyed the path that you took in terms of your honesty about the path you took, and that I think the key takeaways for people are this doesn't get fixed overnight. It doesn't get fixed in one therapy session or with even your first therapist. It might take multiple people. It may not even take a therapist. It might take something different. But the point is to keep trying because the people around you need you, and that if we can develop some compassion and empathy and some sympathy for ourselves, then we can make the world a better place. And so that's really what I got out of your book. It's what I got out of the message today. So thank you very much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right, if you got something out of this episode today, you like what you heard from Tom, please go over to iTunes or the podcast listener of your choice. Leave us a review. Let us know what you thought of the show. Reach out to Tom at the Meditating Vet and let him know you heard about him on the show, and give him a follow. Really appreciate everybody's support. Again, reminder to go to aworthycauselife.com for your gear from the show and just all around extra cool swag that has a first responder in mind and is at their heart, but is not covered in Predator logos or thin blue line stuff. It's a little more subdued. Some of it is real chill. Some of it's a little obvious, but try to make it fun and have it a little bit tongue-in-cheek too. But head over to aworthycauselife.com. Also want to make sure we thank our sponsor for today, Hard to Kill Fitness. Check out their home workout programs and everything that they do that's designed for the military and first responder communities at hardtokillfitness.co. The program is easy to understand but still challenging to even the most hardened operator. You get access to their mindset training, their Facebook group, and access to the coaches with each plan. And like I said, right now they're offering 30% off their bodyweight programs. So check them out at hardtokillfitness.co. All right, everybody, until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.